Welcome back to the Autopilot Oncast, everybody. Um, we are putting together a couple minis for you today, so we wanted to get back in the saddle and give you guys a Spirit update. Lots of cool stuff, lots of information to talk about there. It's become the the center
Never-ending saga.
the center
And
point. John and I were talking, and I was saying, what's gonna happen if they actually go like out of business or get merged? We'll have nothing to talk about
yeah, we have no
anymore.
content at that point. No,
So,
no.
but we wanted to squeeze one in for you. So that's what we're gonna talk about on this little mini episode here. It's recording is November 19th. It's Wednesday. And just this week, or in the last week or so, a couple big things happened. They had to hit a milestone in their bankruptcy to get a tranche, which is I guess another disbursement of money for people that don't know what that means. That's what a tranche is. To meet their second tranche, it was dependent upon, which is their second disbursement. It was dependent upon them coming to an agreement with ALPA and the flight attendants for wage reductions, cost cutting. And so they finally, on the 7th, they came to an agreement in principle, an AIP, and they made it public. The some of the details became public this week, and what it was is they agreed to an 8% base salary cut, and then they cut their direct contribution in half from 16 to 8, which is a pretty substantial, uh, uh, not loss, but what's the word I'm
Future
looking?
earning potential, I guess you
Yeah,
could
giving
say.
up, concession. That's the word I'm looking for.
Yeah.
Because that's not matching. That for people that don't know, at the higher end airlines, you get direct contribution, instead of retirement matching. So
Because
that's a
pilots
pretty
suck with money, and they
yeah.
basically guarantee you to be a
That's
multimillionaire if
exactly
you
right.
join 20 years in
Oh,
the
that's
career.
exactly right.
So, just saying.
So yeah, it was a pretty substantial concession. It'll be effective January 1st, and it's only in a temporary agreement through the end of 2027, because they're trying to say that by then they're going to be profitable and back on track, which is another discussion we're going to have. But
Theoretically.
theoretically, but it does come with a snapback agreement in the AIP, which is starting August of 2028, they'll get a 4% raise, and then in January an additional 4% raise, which snaps them back to the original pay prior to the concession. There's probably also other concessions in there, but they're generally not published, kind of detail things. So this is the little info that's come out. So we're still trying to figure it. Now, they came into the AIP. However, still a few things need to get met. Number one, they need to provide the final documentation of it. These are just leaked things that we're getting. So they'll have to disclose the full AIP. So we'll have all the details. Then they're going to have to still do a ratification vote by the pilots. So this is just the ALPA MEC that's come to the AIP agreement, and they still have to present it to all the pilots for ratification. They most likely would not have presented it to the company to agree, and they didn't think the pilots were going to agree to it. And realistically, it's pretty
It's not that
fair.
bad.
It's not as
Like,
bad as we expected it to be substantially lower or a bigger substantial cut. So it's actually pretty reasonable, considering it's preventing the company from going out of business,
yeah.
this month. And then finally, once that's all done, they still got to get approval by the court. But which was kind of odd to me, although the more research I'm doing, I'm learning. So they came to this agreement, which it meets the requirements for their second disbursement, which gives them more money from creditors. And
Yeah.
so, a lot of the lay people who aren't as educated like I was and slowly educating myself are like, who the heck's going to give them more money? They're on track to lose $850 million this year.
They've
And
lost, I think it was $570 million since their Q3 report this
geez,
year. And I'll
I
go
mean,
through why that's substantial because before it was
please
over. Should I just go through it now?
go for it, man. Yeah, let's
All
get into
right.
it.
So back maybe last week, the Q3 numbers, I think it's called a 10Q document, came out basically, and it went through the earnings for Spirit. They obviously aren't going to do a conference call of going through it. They're just going to release what they have to.
Sure.
So to go through kind of the highlights, Operating revenue was 958.5 million, down from 1.197 billion in Q3 2024. That's about a 20% drop. And
Wow.
so, why are they dropping 20% of their revenue? Well, that's because they basically pulled back a ton of flying, which I'll go through here in a sec. The net loss for Q3 was $317.5 million dollars. And that was last year, they lost $308.2 million, dollars, which is actually worse because I'll go through here in a second.
Okay.
Operating margin was negative 14.1%, which is better than the 24.8% last year, but still deeply negative. You can't run a business a margin of almost 15% negative. And then
Yeah.
they shrank a ton in this third quarter as well.
They have. Yeah.
So their ASMs or available seat miles are down 24% year over year. So they're 25% smaller, basically.
Yep.
Departures are down 22%. The average utilization went from 10.3 hours to 7.7 hours per day. And their load factor slipped from 82% to 78.5%. Now, people also have to factor in for the load factor. They kind of all, I think, work in harmony where your load factor is going to slip, but in order to still fill the airplanes, you have to drop your price significantly in order to fill your airplane. And if you listen to the Frontier Airlines earnings call for Q3, Barry Biffle, the CEO, made a direct correlation to that, saying that we were on track to have great September numbers. And then Spirit announced their bankruptcy, and then they dropped their fares significantly in order to get people to still fly them because that PR is just significantly worse, and
Yeah.
people don't want to fly bankrupt airlines. That's just the
Right.
case.
Right.
Um, and then if you really look at the CASM X fuel, which is basically the cost per available seat mile minus the fuel, so basically just the core nuts and bolts of operating the airline outside of just the fuel cost, which is a mandatory cost, obviously, it actually went up from 8.2 cents per mile to 9.24%. And so that's a huge one if you really think about it. So you have rising costs because you're taking out a lot of your capacity, so you can't spread out your costs in that way either. And the revenue barely goes up a little bit, but that again is supply and demand. So if you take out more planes or more routes, your product becomes more in demand just because of scarcity, right? So they didn't really flip it on that sense of how do I say this? They took out 25% of their their fleets basically, flying or utilization, but they only gained like 5% in their RASM increase of revenue per available seat mile. So there's a huge disparity that
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't link up. So
Doesn't
obviously
make
it's going
sense.
to have huge margin decrease on that. They also go through substantial doubt about the company's ability to continue as a going concern past the 12 months. They did that in the same thing. I can't remember if that was the Q2 where everyone got really concerned about that. And they also have $6.7 billion of liability subject to compromise sitting in bankruptcy as well.
Hmm.
So 8% for losing, your pay as a pilot when you're in that kind of circumstance is pretty horrible. But one thing I wanted to say to the audience is, like we just got done saying, Scott, is who the hell is going to give them money? Well, there's something basically, and I have it in my document, but basically what it is these guys are moving to the front of the line of getting their money back by giving them this liquidity,
Right.
meaning these tranches. So they're fast tracking fast tracking themselves where this money is basically guaranteed, even if the airline had to liquidate for pennies on the dollar, that they're
Right.
still going to get their dollars back. And so that's really important to people to understand, being like, this is so much above me and Scott's head. This is financial banker level stuff where all these guys are very smart, and people who think they're no better than people on Wall Street or multi-billion-dollar companies, we can interpret some of these things, right? But you have to look at these questions on, even like, why did Spirit go through the first bankruptcy and not do any of this, right? I don't know the answer to that, but I guarantee you there is a reason why they did that strategically, knowing that they will be back in bankruptcy later on. I
Hmm.
have to believe that because it makes no sense to me. And so that is one thing I would love to be able to have someone on who understands the economics behind why they did what they did. So that's kind of I wanted to give some context to the viewers on that. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just thought those were important.
No, it's great. That's what separates us from the other pods out there. Is that we're just a couple pilots trying
Yeah.
to figure this out. Like, this is a discussion we would have on the flight deck when the autopilot's on. Huh. Like, that's the whole point, right? Like, this is the exact discussion we have. Um, and you can go listen to Airlines Confidential and what's the other one where those guys are like industry experts that, and they'll have Doug Parker on and like they'll
Jamie
deep dive.
Baker and all
Yeah,
those guys,
exactly.
yeah.
And so they know what they're talking about, right? They're able to get a little more in the details in the weeds, but I think that's what separates us is that we are just a couple guys trying to figure it out, and we're also looking at it from a different perspective. So our discussions are a little bit different than theirs, which is kind of cool. Um, and we're trying to like help make it understandable for the pilots out there trying to figure out what's going on. My question I was researching last night, it was like, at what point can they no longer take a buyer, right? In this bankruptcy. And what I came down, the answer was there isn't one. So right now, because I got into it with Grok and I was like digging. And basically what it came down to was, so current, that would be considered what's called a Section 363 sale initiation, which hasn't currently happened. As of right now, their Chapter 11 remains on firmly, it said, on a standalone reorganization track, meaning as of right now, they're all indications they're giving to the court is we're not, we don't have any buyers we're entertaining. We are planning to continue as a standalone airline, um, which is why we're getting more critical of it because we're like, how are you guys going to make this happen, right? And so what what I was able to get out of it was, they've got this debtor in possession, this DIP lending and creditors built in, which John just kind of explained. They're willing to give them the money
And they've
because it guarantees them, when if Spirit ends up having to liquidate, if nothing else happens and it falls apart, it guarantees that they're the first ones to get paid out from what is liquidated, left over in liquidation. So that is a good strategic move on their end. From the outside to us, we're like, who the heck would give them more money? They're just they've piss poorly managed it and they've run the airline into the ground. It's just they're losing so much money. It makes no sense. So that's the explanation we got to that. But I went through the bankruptcy procedures and things on these, and basically up until the judge signs off on their reorg track at the end, like the last month before they close it out, that's the only time where like they really couldn't entertain it at that point because they've come to the agreement with the court. But as of right now, they are so early in the process, even though it's been going for a few months and feels like longer because we just did it in the beginning of the year.
yeah.
Um, they can Anybody can come in at any point, put an offer on them, and they can go, "Great." And then they would just put a pause on the court stuff, come to an agreement, and then they don't need to reorganize anymore. Go ahead.
Yeah. So a couple things with that. All they need for the next tranche of money is an indication of interest. They don't
Right.
need a term sheet. They don't need I the way I interpret it, you could have one little sliver and they'll basically have the data room be and a data room is basically all the different financials be sent to people that are curious, being like, huh, maybe we are interested, and being able to see that information and then be able to get some kind of document back from that potential buyer saying, hey, they all have to meet pretty loose guidelines for what that looks like, and that can satisfy the actual IOI or the indication of interest by the set date in early December or mid December. One other thing I wanted to say was, so Spirit right now, based upon the Q3 numbers, had about $625 million of liquidity. That was with the DIP financing. Without the DIP financing, by the time Q3 ended, they ended the quarter with about $250 million of free cash. And so that is super, super low. Like if they
Mhm,
didn't have any of the financing in place, they would have already been liquidated at this point or sold
mhm,
or something.
mhm.
They desperately need it because again, with the credit card holdbacks and then with all these different other things that just stay in business, you cannot run a business at that low liquidity level for an airline the size of Spirit. So if you look at the kind of timeline of how much time do they actually have with all the funding, and if they continue to lose the money, I mean, if you think about it, they'll get $200 million if they go through the plan of reorganization and funding the plan of reorganization. So it's called that $850 million. Well, if they're losing about $300 million right now before they went through bankruptcy and shed all this stuff, I don't know, let's say $200 million if they can't, and you run that down to again $200 million. So what would that be? $600 million. So that would be three quarters, if that, depending on if everything is the way it is. But again, you're not generating them as much revenue if you're getting rid of all these airplanes and doing all those things. So it's kind of a death spiral with shrinking to profitability with these huge liability or assets like airplanes. And if you're not utilizing them and you can't generate revenue off of them, man, it just accelerates. So
Yes.
it's like
And
$100 million from a pilot group is not going to do much spread across, 4 quarters. It's just, I don't know.
well, and
It's
it's a trade, right? It gives them a little more, but I was trying to figure out the financial timeline for their standalone because I was like, it just doesn't make sense, right? So what I got was in 2025 they had expected net loss of about 804 million. Then in 2026 they were still having expected loss of 145 million after the cost-cutting network changes took effect. And then in 2027 they're predicting return to profitability with a 219 million net
those are
income.
fairy tale numbers though.
Exactly.
Like, they're
And
not.
so
Yeah,
right. So they need to buy themselves a year and a half essentially to even if and if everything worked perfectly for that to make sense. And like you just said, they really only buying themselves a few quarters if everything works out the way that they're planning it right now.
but they might need time to be able to iron out a deal, and that's
Oh,
the
100%.
thing.
Well, of
So,
course. Yeah, of course. I mean, who knows what's happening behind the scenes,
yeah,
it's they could be sitting down right now while we're recording this, and have the deal. They're finalizing it today, maybe. Who know? I don't know anything, but like that could be the case, right? Or it could not be. And that's
yeah.
the excitement of talking about this is there's always something new every time we bring it up.
It's a
uh,
very interesting, and I hope people understand we're not, like, trying to be excited or whatever because we know it's people's livelihoods and we know how difficult
yeah,
it is there, but this is, from the outside looking in, it's very interesting because it has huge industry ramifications. So I think that we'll see what's going on by mid-December, and one other thing too is by doing this, by the plan of reorganization, it's not even necessarily the court is going to be the issue with getting it approved. It's the creditor board. So the people who actually are giving them checks and whoever the board of individuals is or parties associated with that will vote on if they actually want to go through with the plan of reorganization. Because again, it's that their tranche of money that they're willing to fund it. And I still think that they care about that too. So it's not like if they're looking at the numbers now and they have way better idea of what the actual numbers are, even going into the holiday season, by the time that December 13th and they do vote on if it's going to be approved or not, I don't even think they're going to put it to a vote if they obviously know it's not going to get approved. So it really is going to come down to, is there anything going to happen between now and the end of the year before those tranches are released?
hmm,
And I don't know enough that there's a real possibility that there's
sure,
someone that comes in and says, "Hey, we're interested." Doesn't mean it's going to happen, but it says that it's very loose again that that can happen. Or
right.
the other framework that can go down is the plan of reorganization is approved, knowing that a sale will occur the day after they exit bankruptcy. So
Mm,
if you look at different airline bankruptcy cases, and I can't remember the names, I want to say it was American Airlines um, and US Airways or
U.S.
something like
Air,
that.
yeah,
Yeah, and basically a lot of the times the day after they exit bankruptcy, in order to exit bankruptcy, they have the funding in place from a sponsored party in that sense. But one thing, this is where I don't know enough. I do not think anyone will merge with them. And merging and acquiring an airline are two very different things. And I think I brought
yes,
this up last time. But merging is you have to assume a lot more debt and you have
yes,
to bring back every single one of the labor. Um,
right.
and those guys are really expensive. All the guys that are, um, I guess the guys on furlough aren't, but you're taking really high earning people and putting them into something and putting a new JCBA and all that.
Right.
Scott, do you wanna kind of break down what a 363 sale under these are, if you even very bare bones? Because I think it's important because basically someone like Frontier can have a totally different outcome that people are thinking is probably going to occur.
Yes. It allows the company to sell their assets outside of the normal order of business because they're in bankruptcy. And the most important aspect of that is those things sold are free and clear of all their liens and claims and encumbrances that are against them. With
Big
with the
thing.
tranches, yeah, with the DIP tranches and stuff we've been talking about, those are technically that's when you get into like the technicality of encumbrances, and they prioritize who has the highest encumbrance, which is what they're all trying to do by giving more money is to get higher on that list because then they're first to get paid out in liquidity. So if you had a 363 sale, to my understanding, I could be wrong. Somebody can correct me in the comments. This is where those creditors that have been giving the money will start getting their liquidity paid out because they're in bankruptcy. It wipes out a lot of the old liens and tied to their debt and allows them to sell these things for liquid cash to satisfy the debt they owe. That's the way I've interpreted it.
And be able to
Um,
shed the debt. The debt will remain with the parent company, Spirit Airlines, and that will get at that point once the 363 of whatever has been wanted to be parted out of the airline, then that will basically go into a liquidation of some sort of basically pennies on the dollar of that money will not get paid out at that point. And does that make sense?
right. Yeah. Yeah. The big thing, it gives them speed. Because if they're going to go through a regular reorganization plan, the full Chapter 11, they were to do it properly. I don't know how they got it through so fast the first time. It normally would take a year or two at least. Which still doesn't explain how they made it go so fast the first time, other than like, oh, we knew this wasn't the real one, which I
Yep.
can't believe. The fact that's the court's fail if they signed off on that. But if they do a 363, then they can just arrange to sell everything or auction it at the highest price, and it wipes out all the debt. It gets everything done. It closes the company, initiates the sale, and everybody washes their hand, the debtors get paid out, boom, off it goes, right? Of course, there's a lot more, there's a bidding for the assets and all these things, a lot of details that I don't know deep enough to have a discussion about.
Yep.
And anybody, go in there, ChatGPT, Grok, whatever. I mean, that's the new way of Googling something, right? Just look up 363 bankruptcy sale and you can ask it specific to Spirit, and the AI will give you a nice pretty good solid breakdown on it. That's essentially what I'm referencing here while I'm giving you guys kind
Scott,
of my
does the
understanding.
buyer have to absorb all of the labor? Oh, I can answer that.
Yeah, go ahead. I
So
don't know.
they do not have to assume the labor. They can say we want 25% of the labor, but they don't need to assume all 2,000 pilots or whatever they're going to end up at.
That is the big difference between a sale
So
versus a merger, and because of it, if again we keep referring to Frontier, which is owned by Indigo Partners, because it's just the most logical result conclusion to this whole saga. And we're not the only podcast that said that. You get on
everyone,
the industry ones, they all talk about that, right? It's still the most logical solution. And so it would allow Indigo to not bring on the debt aspects of things, because that's their Indigo's very anti-debt, right? They don't like to hold debt, which is why they are as successful as they are. um, and it would allow them to shed what they don't want and bring in only the assets they do want to grow Frontier and their group, and then cut out anything they don't want in the deal. So it would be the most logical, profitable, and sensical move based off of their business model. It's man, it's going to suck for a lot of the Spirit guys. I think they're hoping on a merger, right? Because then they keep their jobs. They might get stapled if they're on furlough, but at least they have a job. I don't think we're going to see a merger. I agree with you, John.
it doesn't
Ir
make any
it would be
sense.
irresponsible from a business standpoint for
Yeah.
anybody to try to merge them. So you're gonna I think at some point, they keep saying, "Oh, we're standalone, going alone, going alone. We're we're shrink to profitability." We had this discussion in the last podcast or two. As far as I know, the only company that has successfully shrank to profitability without being acquired in the process was Horizon, and that's because they wanted to get rid of the Q400 fleet, and they're owned by Alaska. So Alaska just floated the boat on that one. Everybody else has eventually been bought out in a shrink to
because you
profitability.
cannot. This industry does not support the little guy. You will get destroyed, basically.
Well, you've made
And
enough poor decisions to get here. I
yeah,
mean, that's why you're there, and you're not super profitable, right?
can I make one point though? Because I think it's really important because I hear from a lot of guys I fly with and a lot of people that don't totally understand the economics of scale in the airline industry and why it's so critical, especially in 2025 going into 2026. The way I see it, I've been listening to a lot of Frontier's earnings calls, and for them, they're really trying to go after loyalty. And the reason why is for credit card spend.
Mm-hmm.
And so Frontier's credit card spend per average passenger or averaged out per passenger is $4. I think they said Delta was $36 per person. And so what happens is they want the scale in order to grow the revenue on those credit card sales. And even if they go from $4 to say $15, they're a highly profitable business with their costs associated.
That's a
So
400% increase.
in order
Yeah.
to work in this business, you need to have a network and a reason for people to want to subscribe to you. And I think the value proposition is really good at Frontier, actually, because if you look at what they've been doing, you can have like your spouse fly for free with you, get upgraded to first class for like $5,000 at credit card spend. Now, this is an advertisement for this, but it's significantly different than versus being a Delta whatever mileage program is,
I
the Sky
was.
Pesos, right?
You didn't get
Because
anything for spending tons of money at
yeah.
Delta.
So they're trying to hook people into this program to increase that credit card spend, but in order to diversify that and bring it to more people, they want to go after and if they can do that through a 363 and pick up the assets, the slots in LaGuardia and grow in these other cities, yeah, they're going to be a profitable business. I just it frustrates me when everyone's like, "Well, you take two bad businesses and you put them together, it's not going to be any better." I'm like, "No, it's going to be significantly different because there's already been not even rumors. The CEO is coming out on LinkedIn saying, "Yeah, Wi-Fi is coming." They're putting in first class. They're doing these other things. You put this along with scale, and you're going to see a tangible difference.
Yeah.
And just like how it took the legacies after COVID and really before COVID, I guess you could say, of going and competing against the low cost and kick their ass basically, and the low cost with the basic economy. It just amazed me to think that these other multi-billion-dollar companies are going to roll over and do nothing about it and then just vanish. But I guess that's what Scott Kirby says, so it must be gospel, right? I mean,
Oh gosh.
so I don't know. It just frustrates me because I'm like, look, man, like there's a real case, and if you look at how did United become so profitable? How did Delta become so profitable? Through consolidation of two failing businesses that gave them scale and let them basically spread costs out and increase credit card spend. This is the exact same except for low cost.
Yep.
I mean, it's not that difficult in my opinion to understand that those points. And so I don't know. I'm kind of bullish in that sense with what the low cost space can turn into if it's consolidated with the what's it called? With the capacity spread out, and now there's only one company offering $15 or $25, maybe it's $50 fares now because there's no one on the bottom end.
Right. They won't need
So
to they'll have no competition to drive it that low anymore. Which is
yeah,
I mean, on a personal level, I think that's good. I think we got too low on the ticket prices, the race to the bottom, and this will kind of raise the floor up so that ticket prices
yeah.
are more reasonable.
Jamie
Um,
Baker said on the Airline Confidential podcast is a really interesting point. One of the only things in the entire economy that has not been really affected by inflation is airline ticket sales,
hmm,
and because they basically are they would still probably be profitable without the credit cards. They would do different things, but they can
right.
basically offset a lot of the cost and the tickets and the ticket prices by the credit card sales. So they can keep the ticket prices low and compete against the low guys because of that extra revenue in that sense. So what he's saying is like there's going to be significant increase in terms of ticket prices that is available to airlines. Because what are they going to do? There's like 7 businesses out here. If everyone decides to raise their fares, just like how they do with baggage policies, it usually is one airline deciding it and the rest follow suit very quickly. It's
That's right.
because it's a monopoly, basically. You can't just go in there and start a business and offer that. So,
I
anyways,
agree. No, you're absolutely right, man. It's kind of cool that this week we had like more details to discuss on it. Like there's decent amount that's happened since we talked about it last. And now
they
we have a more, at least now we know, like, okay, if they stick on the standalone path, we see the path. This is the milestones they have to hit, and if that's how they're going to go, then okay, at least they've painted kind of a picture of how they want it to go down, like you said in fairy tale land. But at least now we have that. Whereas, but then again, anybody can come in and throw an offer and completely turn this around, which will give us just more to talk about with
more
it.
content, keep our
Yeah.
podcast security out here.
That's right.
One other thing I wanted to mention too was there's an article that came out. If you look at Cerium data, which we don't have access to, that costs like thousands of dollars a month. Cerium, if you ever want to reach out to us, I would love to be able to have that data. Anyways,
Sponsor.
if you, I would love to have a sponsor of that. If you look at the data that they put out, they canceled 11,000 flights compared to last year. So it's, I think, 200 and it's like millions of seats basically that they've taken out of the system. So what I'm curious on is what is the average fare going to increase by because of the low cost taken out of the system? And so the domestic capacity has continued to shrink in that sense. So
Yep.
where are the yields and where are the actual fares going to end up? Because this is exactly what we're talking about is you take out the capacity and you start to have a little bit better profitability, and especially the big guys, because they can go into a place like, I don't know, Minneapolis, for example. I guess that's not a great example, but Los Angeles, for example, because Spirit pulled out significantly there. I do wonder what are the average fares going in and out of there now, because I would say probably 15% of all of the low cost stuff has been pulled out, so that has a tangible, meaningful effect on their bottom line.
Right. We're gonna see the consolidation they've been asking for. That's a big thing. You keep hearing in these earnings call them saying there's too many seats available, there's too much availability. We need consolidation, and this is going
It's
to bring that
coming.
up. One way or another, this is going to bring that about in the long run. And that's what the industry needs to see. And that's, like John said to a lot of people, they're like, why you guys keep talking about this? And it's, well, like John said, it has huge ramifications throughout the industry, whether for the better or worse. But if you're going to be working in our industry, as a pilot, it's good to understand what your future might look like because of the things that are happening. Keeping your finger on the pulse allows you to make educated decisions. This is how the guys who like jump ship early when they see the mergers and the bankruptcies coming and they get out and go somewhere else is because these guys are paying attention to this stuff.
Yeah.
If you just show up and you're not educated and it hits you upside the head, oh, I didn't know the company was failing. Well, we're we're giving you that info, and for those of you listening, I hope you take it to heart, kind of thing.
Can I make one more point? Because I've heard this one fly in the line a lot too, being like, well, why don't they just let them fail completely?
Mm,
Why doesn't everyone just let them fail? Right?
mm,
Because every other business like Delta and United will swarm for those slots, those gates, and you will continue to be small, and you will not be able to have basically the the increase in revenue and be able to spread costs out through growth, which is what low cost does best, and that's why they were killing everyone else because they could spread their cost out through growth in that sense. But then also, you have no chance to grow. So the biggest thing for low cost, look at Barry. He was in front of Congress a couple of weeks ago. And he basically said, we have no gates. I mean, Delta in Atlanta won't let Frontier do anything because everything is controlled by Delta. So, how are we supposed to do this if it's a monopolistic environment? And anytime we try to go and, try to make our life better by growing, we're basically denied because they just swarmed those opportunities for those assets
exactly.
in
Right.
an easy way that is not going to have any DOJ issues. So that's another thing too, is like there's not going to be a DOJ issue for Frontier buying them, but you think that they're going to let Delta or United buy them, like, and all their assets like that. So I don't even think you'll see an IOI from any of the legacies, because they're like, why the hell would we do that? United specifically said, because we have so many airplanes coming, we have no need for you
That's the
because we're
big
doing this on
thing.
our own.
Exactly. Exactly.
So
They don't.
I just want to put that out there as a
Right.
last point for me, because Frontier needs it, I think. Or, I mean, who the hell knows? Maybe Southwest come in, but I
Sure.
just,
JetBlue. I don't
I don't know, right? There's not many players.
know.
That's the thing, though, that can do this.
Right.
It's about
Right.
three other people. So,
Right. And that's why we keep coming back to the logical conclusions that everybody keeps coming to, because it's the only thing that we see that makes sense. Um,
exactly.
Generally speaking, the most logical thing is what ends up, you know, happening. So anywho, yeah, everybody. So we wanted to just give you an update and get another episode out there. And we appreciate all you listening. We love your comments. We love we get, we're starting to get some regular emails from people, suggestions, which we are taking to heart. And as you know, I just moved into a house about a month ago. John is closing on his house next month. So through the end of the year, we're
Yep.
working our butts off. We're pretty busy. I think come beginning of the year, things will settle down. Plus, that's a slower season for flying. So it'll give us more time to kind of get back on track and reset and get some more frequency. But in the meantime, we're trying to continue to get stuff out there for you. Um, Socials, Autopilot on podcast, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, Spotify, Apple Pods. We're on all those. Um, Autopilot on podcast at gmail.com. Look forward to hearing from y'all. And luckily, we do have a couple more episodes to release before the end of the year. So there will be at least a few going forward for y'all. So we appreciate y'all listening. And thanks again.
See you guys.
Bye.